in industrial engineering from Arizona State University. Her research interests include the design of experiments, response surface methods, mathematical modeling, data analysis, data science, and simulation methodology. Many of those areas she's drawn on in this experimental research. Her particular study in the PLIG was to use data collected from engineering class offerings during the last academic year in conjunction with student performance data to create mathematical models that quantify the relationship between my course's data and student performance. Please join me in welcoming Rachel Silvestrini.
Hi. Okay, so I wasn't entirely sure of who would be in the audience. I mean, I saw a few names, or what the background would be. So I've left this a little bit generic, but I can go into either more or less mathematical detail as we go through. So feel free to interrupt and ask questions, and we'll just go about it that way. Okay, so I put together a few slides. For the work that I'm presenting here, I've done some research myself, and then I've conducted research with a couple of students. One, Akane Fujimoto, who is an undergrad in the industrial engineering department. I partially funded her summer co-op with the PLIG grant, and so she and I worked together to do research. And I'll pass around this, you can have a look at, this is a paper that we wrote together and submit for publication based on this PLIG grant and research. And so that paper and then another paper that I'm working on contains all references and extra mathematical details and details on the work. So I'm happy to send anyone a copy. You can browse through it, and then feel free to send me an email if you want a copy of the paper. Hasn't been accepted for publication yet, but we anticipate it to have good results. So also I've worked on doing some extensions to the work with a master's thesis student, Billy Darlington. He's doing a dual degree, undergrad, BS, and MS. So here's the paper that's going around, and this is the abstract of the paper, but you could have a look at that. So initially I was motivated to work on this research because I thought, I can't remember, maybe it was from Mary Beth, someone, when I was learning how to use the My Courses site when I first got to RIT a couple of years ago, I discovered that you could view where students had clicked on the material in your class. And I thought, wow, this is fascinating. I can see what students are doing. And then I thought, hey, maybe I could use that in some way to improve my teaching. And so in relation to that, I thought I could maybe improve my teaching if I discover some sort of mathematical link or relationship between what students are viewing and the grades that I've entered in there, in addition with, how they're performing in the class. So then I thought, well, what are the best predictors of student success, and then how can we leverage that? And so that was a lot of the motivation, the work that Akane and I were doing together early on. But then it's also morphed into, as I was discovering lots of relationships based on just an analysis of my class and a couple of other classes, I thought, well, maybe we could make this, I could make some sort of autonomous model so that because as a professor, I get pegged to do these early alerts, which I do the early alerts, but I thought maybe there's a way we could leverage this information to create some sort of early alert system. So learning analytics, not a new field, and I wasn't certainly not suggesting that I was discovered, this or proposing something entirely new. I forgot. The first international conference on learning analytics, it was held in 2011. I should put that date in there. And this was a quote from the conference of what learning analytics is: the measurement, collection, analysis, and reporting of data about learners and their context for the purpose of understanding and optimizing learning environments. So there's been work done in this field cited in the paper that's going around, as well as I have additional citations based on new reference searches and updated reference searches, because papers keep coming out pretty frequently. But maybe, I guess this is really my opinion, but there's a few prominent works out there, and I'm not sure what the system is that maybe RIT is evaluating, but there's a system that's called Course Signals that was built at Purdue University, and they use proprietary algorithms. They won't tell people what they're doing in order to predict course outcomes. And it works in real time, and it's shown success in terms of being able to predict how students are going to do, and they've also showed in some of the papers they've published that they could reduce dropout rates or increase retention. And so we thought also there was a need for a more transparent model and modeling process, which is partially what this paper is doing, and work that I will continue on to. Any questions at this point, or comments, or?
Quick question, do you teach traditional in-class or
Yes.
or online courses? What's your method?
Yeah, so I'll get into that a little bit, but I teach traditional in-class classes, but I do, I suppose, kind of a little bit of blended work in that I post some videos outside of class that I expect students to watch, and then we discuss them in class. But my primary, and so I'll also mention that, but good. Probably everyone's familiar with this, but I put it in the presentation. I'm happy to share the presentation too, just to document, how to get to the items. You'll probably, I'm sure, know how to do this. But from the My Courses data, we could view the reports, and the statistics that we could get at pertain to they're individual based on what professor has put up information for their own class. So my class is not going to look the same as somebody else's class. We can look at the overview of all of the information and the users that have visited this and the average time that they've spent there. I think that from what I've found in all of the data I've pulled and collected, the time component is, I don't know how to say it tactfully, worthless, because students pull up a browser and then go somewhere, and then it says they've been on there for 10 hours, or even there's some, if you click in and out of it or do some funny thing, some students were showing me, then it looks like the time they spent was 0. And so I can't seem to extract useful information with regards to the time students have spent on a particular item. But I can also, so here's some closer look at lecture slides by topic and day for a course I'm teaching now. And if I click into a particular lecture, so I blocked out the names, I can see who's visited, how many times they've visited, and then again, some time information. So the process that I've been going through of the data analysis and extraction is the following.
Rachel?
Yes.
So those are like PowerPoint slides posted from your lectures,
Yes. Yeah.
and you don't provide paper copies, right?
No. There is some, like I do exercises in class and I provide paper copies of those. But
General lecture slides, if they want to have a copy, then they have to go
yes,
get it.
they have to go and get it.
So for the student who viewed those slides for 2 seconds, can we interpret that as the act of downloading the slides?
I assume that. So this requires some assumptions, and that's one of the assumptions that we make. Yes.
That if they're willing to at least click on it, they're at least somewhat willing
Yeah.
to look at it.
Right. Yeah.
Not just trying to.
Hopefully. Yeah.
Until it's kind of interesting because in distance courses, I would count how many posts they had read,
Yeah.
discussion boards and stuff.
Right.
And as soon as they realized how I was scoring that, then they just started going through all the posts. And everybody read everything all of a sudden.
Yeah. Yeah, and I thought too, once I learned that I could view what students have been doing, I told them, hey, students, I can see what you've done and what you've clicked on. And a lot of people hadn't known that at first, but now they seem to all know that. Doesn't seem to faze them, but I tell them I don't go in there and really check on, which student has done this. That would be too time consuming.
They don't have the same big brother fears that we
I
do.
know, sort of interesting. Yeah, that's a whole nother topic for discussion. Okay, so the process of data extraction analysis that I've been going through is I'm extracting data from, our learning management system is my courses. At my previous university, we're using Blackboard. I think they're all quite similar. In addition to doing some data extraction from my courses, I've also pulled information from SIS because a good predictor of student success in the class tends to be, especially for the classes I'm teaching, prerequisite information, or prerequisite information can also be used to sort of group students or be an additional input.
Would you have to do that by hand or did you get institutional?
Yeah, by hand for SIS. But I worked with here at the learning center, worked with Chris Weber to get some data extraction from my courses, because one of the issues with the data extraction is it can be tedious and ugly to hand pull and get into a manageable working
So
Excel sheet.
I should jump in here because
Yep.
earlier you said you hinted that Desire to Learn is thinking about a learning analytics package in the future.
Right.
So we're in an odd situation right now where we could not rerun this experiment today because My Courses is now hosted in the cloud. We no longer have direct access to the My Courses database.
Really?
So, just to clarify and to set expectations around what is possible in our learning environment, we're mounting a pilot of the My Courses Learning Analytics package later this year. Sorry for that digression.
So
Oh,
it's
yeah,
an
that's
add-on,
fine.
essentially.
Right.
Yeah. When that's tough. I know when we were meeting before, there was discussion about the expense of the package, and I wasn't sure where we were.
We're evaluating the package. After the new year, we will have it on a trial basis, and we're just now spinning up plans around how we're going to make good use of that trial.
Nice. Okay, good. Well, let me know if I can be of any help. Okay, so extract the data, and then I do descriptive and statistics and inferential analysis. I'll talk a little bit about what methods I've used. Once I fit certain models and my students, we say, does the model explain student success? If the answer is yes, we try to draw conclusions or make decisions based on that. And if the answer is no, then we try to collect more data or try different modeling strategy has been the process we've been following. Pretty standard data analysis type of process. So here's an overview of some of the initial, yes?
Sorry, did you consider this research that had to get human factors approval, or is this?
Oh yes, I went through the IRB to get approval. Yeah.
So is it understanding that any of us want to do that sort of thing, that we have to write a new IRB?
Yeah, that's a good question. Probably, because I just did it for myself and the students I was working with, but maybe there could be some group IRB. I wasn't even sure initially if I had to do it or not, because I thought, well, this is data I'm pulling from my classes, so that it's a little unclear to
Well,
me.
if it's just administrative, then you shouldn't have to have an IRB.
Yeah.
You're gonna publish it.
Yeah, so since we were going to publish it too, we went ahead and I went through the process of getting the IRB approval, and
Makes sense.
yeah. So last summer we were working, well, in 2015, on pulling data from a few different classes. So that's maybe a little bit hard to see this slide here. Two classes that I teach, design of experiments and linear regression analysis. You can see the number of students in here. I'm also part of a group of teachers that does this fundamentals of industrial engineering, so we pulled the data for that class. The fundamentals of industrial engineering is a class that's taken by students in their second year. The other two classes I teach are taken by students mostly in their fourth and fifth year. In engineering, we do, have a 5-year undergrad program. So this shows you a little bit about the number of students, the demographic information in terms of the females and males. And then this is the level, undergrad or grad. There's some, how we classify the graduate standing depends on where they're at in their studies. And also the classes I teach, the design of experiments and linear regression, is what are called these co-listed classes, in which there are 500 and 600 level. So students can enroll at the 600 level, and then I give them some extra work or an extra project to do. So in addition, so after collecting the data, this requires data scrubbing and labeling of variables. So I'm sort of going through that a bit quickly, but here are, for example, those 3 classes that I talked about. We broke up the data into looking at grades or predictors based on their midterm or final exam or their final total grade. And we looked at not only information such as sex of the student or the level at which they're at, but also what content they've accessed, when they accessed it in relation to when it was posted and when the exam was, etc. So there's some sort of weird coding sometimes in the variables, and I didn't feel that I had time to get into all of it, but I'm happy to talk about that offline or really at any point. So here are some of the analysis methods. I mentioned the descriptive statistics, and then looking at things like graphs and average and variability of the data. Also, we then, of the modeling techniques, you can sort of pay attention to the bottom three there. I've used linear regression, decision trees, and logistic regression. For those that I don't know what everyone's understanding is of the statistical techniques, but I can go into extra detail as needed. So I found some potentially helpful, and I say, or maybe depressing, descriptive statistics. For example, this graphic here shows the percentage of students in the design of experiments class that I taught that accessed the lecture slides, the topic that is in the order in which they appeared. So that is throughout the semester. And I do not know why we see this drop dramatically. That's why I was saying depressed me. In terms of the student access, you can see some increase in student access of material that happens right around when the midterm occurs, and then it drops down dramatically and maybe goes up slightly towards the end of the semester. But interestingly, yeah, maybe. We saw the same results for the fundamentals of industrial engineering, which is taken by the second year students and in fact by a couple of other classes since then that I've analyzed within the industrial engineering department. So, and I'm not saying this result is going to be applicable to every single class across the university. Each individual would need to do some assessment of their own classes, but, you know, something maybe worth looking into. So, for the classes that I taught and of the data analysis that I did, we found useful results from across a variety of techniques. Linear regression provided very useful information in order to figure out what were the best predictors of the final student grade performance as a function of the input variables that we collected. The models that we fit are not consistent across the classes, and that seemed to be consistent with the literature in that, you know, you have to kind of do the modeling for every single class, but that information we've found can be useful in terms of, for one professor, such as myself, teaching the same class over and over, I've been able to start to see a trend of similar models that are happening every semester that I analyze the data. Now that's important because my student Billy Darlington and I have been leveraging that to create our early alert models, in that, oh, we know that this access to these particular lecture materials, or, you know, this homework grade tends to be very predictive of how the students are going to do. So then we've been using that information to leverage that and create models that give students points based on access of certain material in a class that I've already analyzed, and use that as our early alert system. So one thing that we didn't, my students and I, looking at the literature search, that we didn't see a lot of presented were the concept of interaction between variables. And what that means is if you're looking at making a prediction such as how the student is going to do on a final exam, that's the y-axis here, we can predict that in terms of the x-axis. This would be percentage of lectures that the student access on average. So if you see these two lines, for yourself, just think of the average between those lines. So there's some sort of increasing trend on average, meaning as students access more material, they seem to be doing better on their final exam. Now, I'm counting, that gets back to the assumptions there. If they've clicked on it, I assume that means they've accessed it and paid attention to it in some way. And if a student makes a copy, though, and gives it to another student that hasn't clicked on the material, I have no way of knowing or accounting for whether or not they've accessed that. So, how can we account for that? Give things like surveys, or there might be other methods that we could do, but that's just a drawback, maybe, or limitation of the study. So what interactions is in linear regression is that the relationship between this response and the lecture, percentage of lecture access, might change in the presence of another variable. So here what you can see is that dotted line. That is students that have gotten an average of a 70 on their homework grades have a much steeper increase in that relationship between the final exam and the lecture access, meaning those students who aren't doing very well in their homeworks, it's very beneficial for them to access the lecture content. Whereas the students that have a really high homework grade on average, that top dark line there, it doesn't make too much of a difference on their final exam performance as they access more lecture content. Now, what you're also seeing here are just the single drawn in lines. You have to think about this in terms of there's variability around there, and it's not exactly the same. But what I've used this for is that, hey, we can have some relatively good relationships that we can uncover. And I'm trying to, in my classes now, show students at the beginning of the class, hey, I think it's beneficial for you to access the lecture information, and here's why. This plot, we're working on doing a better representation of the material, but we're using some decision tree analysis also. So this is changing gear in order to show and decide on what material might be.
He said he was going to come back, but he left. But then he said he was coming back at 3. Like he left at 3 and he said he'd come back.
Sorry to interrupt.
Oh yeah, that's all right.
Noticed it wasn't covered, so I just.
Thank you.
Is there somewhere I could go? Do you know where he is?
No, this is an hour session, so I'm sure he's gone.
Sorry.
Oh, thank you for coming.
It's not till 4:30.
Is this till 4?
No, it's still
4.
Yeah, till 4.
Sorry.
Okay.
Anyways, so what we're trying to do, and I mentioned before, is using the results that I found in my classes to look at, say, creating decisions on whether or not we should generate an early alert for students based on performance. So we looked at a particular access to lecture material and homework grades and say, okay, we're going to assign different points to things. So if a student is accessing the lecture material or gets a certain grade in homework, then we give them a certain amount of points. And then over time, we could look at how are these students doing in terms of their performance and whether or not an early alert would be signaled for them. So the groupings here are, these are students that the left-hand side that got an A in the class, and based on our early alert somewhat automated, equation, none of the students would have been triggered by that red dotted line, which was the threshold of saying, hey, you lost these amount of points, you need to pay attention to this or start accessing more lecture content. And the point, I guess, from this graphic is to realize that we're starting to look at generating the alerts, and we've had some success of saying, oh, we would have generated these 10 early alerts based on this, and that would be beneficial for these students. And we're trying to have models that would generate more rather than less alerts. So there's some toggling there, decisions to be made in terms of, well, I'd rather, give out more early alerts than not enough. So main conclusions, and I can bring up other graphics or we can just have a discussion about the data or the analysis, is that different classes that I analyze, even for the classes that I've taught, result in different variables being correlated with the response. And that's also an important distinction then when I put in my second bulletin, is correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation. I always, even though I teach about how to do these methods, have to continually remind myself when looking at the data is if the lecture access is highly correlated with doing well, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's causing the students to do well. But it could be something that's causing it, and that will have to be assessed in some sort of meta-analysis or long-term study. And I pair the results I get with studies I've done in terms of how students learn and what we know about learning and access of information, etc. So I think that these results still can be, given those caveats, used to improve a class or create these early alert systems. But I think we need to do more work and over a variety of classes, and I'm interested if other professors here at RIT have done any of this work or what we could do to move the research forward. That's what I had.
So I have a question.
Yes.
The advising community tells us that the student's best early alert, or the early alert that best serves the student, has some rich contextual information in the open text area of the early alert. So whether that's, the love sandwich where we say you're doing okay, but you could do better, I know you can improve.
Yeah.
When a student receives an early alert generated by these models, what do they see?
So right now, they're not getting anything, but what we've played around with is just creating the model that creates the alert, and then it would say something like, an early alert has been generated from you in this class due to, and then it would say like what they lost points on, meaning due to not accessing lecture and poor homework performance. And in the research that, the literature that we found regarding receiving alerts, we're sort of interested to find that peer review studies indicated that students, regardless of the type of alert they were receiving or the content in the alert, were showing improved performance or like a sense of feeling that someone cared about them, even if it was just generated by an automated system, which was very interesting, we thought, because even if it was just an equation that was sending them a nudge, that was doing something.
Interesting.
Yeah. Other questions or? Yeah.
So I'm coming from it's been a long time since I've had statistical background.
Yeah.
Sort of like undergrad being
Yeah.
I'm a professor now in visual design, but I'm starting to integrate some analytics tools from like Google Analytics, but also I'm teaching game level design, and there's heat maps generated, certain analytical tools for testing gameplay that sort of, in terms of using like some of the linear regressive models or like sort of standard statistics, is there like a way that or sort of a get back on ramp that you can suggest for someone like me who wants to sort of do a refresher course in order to do a better job of applying some of the tools or asking some of the questions in order to actually also hand some of the tools to my students for their
Yeah.
own analysis, but then also for my own from a grade predictive standpoint I'm interested also.
And if you could rephrase the question, just to restate for the captioning, that would be.
Oh, yes. So, the question is, how do I refresh on statistics and data analysis?
Maybe what tools are available for students as well.
Right. Aside from taking a whole course or picking up a few, books on statistics or data analysis, there are a lot of good brief like free courses on Coursera that you can watch, or YouTube videos on, here's the 10-minute version on how to do linear regression. Maybe that's not a good answer. Is that
I'll give it a try. I didn't if you have any specifics about it now, definitely check this out.
specific? Yeah.
I think you should check edX.
What about that?
Okay. Sorry.
Just buy it. Okay, that's
I'm fine.
Can I just jump in one real quick? Open source WEKA Weka.
Okay.
It's out of University of New Zealand. Excellent bare bones data analysis tool. If you want to just jump in, help guide get you going again on statistics and stuff like that. So that might be going. WEK. I don't know if you use Weka at all.
I haven't.
Sarah, it's a good tool.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Okay.
So we talked a lot about the fact of viewing lecture as one input to the model. What others are, or is it completely, we want to ask what is the single greatest predictor, but what I'm hearing you say is it depends per course.
Depends.
What are the other strong inputs or strong indicators that you've seen?
Well, I mean, it depends too on if you're looking at the midterm versus the final grade or the final exam grade, and depending on the class. But the relationship, we found some indicators of when they viewed the content or when they first accessed the content to be significant predictors. And of course, the things we started using things like the homework grades and the prereqs, which have nothing to do with the access of information in my courses, but the homework grade itself, is stored, well, you don't have to, but I myself put in all the, grades of student homework. And we did find that students viewing the feedback that they got on homework. So I've now started to I only collect homework in the Dropbox, and then I have the TAs do the grading, and I go through the class sizes have gotten a little out of control. So I have the TAs grade the homework, and I say, okay, this is here's all of the solutions, and I go through in detail with them of what points go where. And then the TAs write feedback, and I tell them, if they got it wrong, tell them what they got wrong and where to look on the solutions manual. And then it turned out that whether the student looked at that feedback or not was pretty informative in some classes. So that was good. But yes.
So you mentioned you get the completion summary in CSV format. How do you get to completion summary by a student? I want to be able to figure out how to get it for a particular topic.
Oh, yeah, I guess like in this one here, so there's the student. So once you click on, for example, if I clicked on, like the X bar and R charts from this past Monday's class. So if I click on that, then it will show me, so that wasn't for this class. I forgot which one I did. It was one of the middle ones, but
You get there by clicking on the end of students, right?
yeah, you click on that. This is hard to see, but it's blue. It's a different color. Yeah, you click on that, and then that drills down to.
How do you get to that previous page where the number came up,
Here.
the content reports?
Right. So you go on view. You have to be in the table of contents for your course in the content section, and then you do the view reports.
Where's the
Related tools, view reports.
Okay. And then you can see it. Okay, thank you.
So you talked about if different classes yield different correlations. I get that. When talking different classes, I mean this section of ISTE 120 and this section of ISTE 120, or could you at least say all sections of ISTE 120 are going to yield some similar results?
Yeah, so I mean like different classes, like fundamentals of industrial engineering versus linear regression versus experimental design, etc. I guess I haven't collected enough information, but I'm starting to over time to suggest that like I've been teaching the linear regression class for a number of years in a row, and the most important predictors of success are remaining relatively consistent.
So it stays consistent by course. So that's something you can use. Excellent.
Yeah, but I think you'll have to verify that.
Oh, okay.
We need to verify that for other classes.
Understand.
If it doesn't hold up, do you want to go deeper into student demographics? If
Maybe.
it doesn't hold up across sections, that implies the makeup of the class itself is.
Right. And so that's why I was hoping that maybe the prereq or some other information could be used to kind of standardize the class for the makeup of the class.
Thank
Mm-hmm.
Could be the time of day the course is
There you go.
Yeah.
Nice. Very, very, very important.
Yeah. I think there's lots of, probably potentially interesting variables that will influence the outcome.
Do you find that by giving the students this heads up, so to speak, at the beginning, now that you know what some of these predictors are and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to present them, do you see them being receptive to that, or is it just talking?
like, do they take the advice to
Yeah.
look at the content? I'm not sure.
Like, how's it changed over time since now that, you were saying one of the purposes was to improve your own teaching?
Yeah.
So now you've gone on to take this action step of actually presenting what you know to students. Has
Yeah, I
made a
mean,
difference?
I'm trying to assess whether or not it's made a difference. I think it's too early on to tell. And then also, if I'm saying that, then you have to start thinking about, well, what role does that play in changing these models or changing the outcomes? But since I haven't seen in the couple of semesters I looked at drastic change in the lecture access, maybe they're not paying attention to that advice.
Have you noticed an increase in retention? Or decrease in nutrition in the course, less students withdrawing or failing?
No, I mean, I have pretty low withdrawal or failure rates for the upper level classes I'm teaching, so I haven't seen, and I think that's another probably important measure to look at over the long term.
So this would be really applicable at the lower level where, where, especially like some of the gatekeeper courses where you're looking to assist students and keep them in the program so that they can get to that level.
Yeah, hopefully, right?
I had an interesting experience on looking at when students open the files. So I was looking at, I teach a Friday, once a week class Friday this semester. And I looked on Thursday night, 24 hours before the class, and 2/3 of the class hadn't opened the file. There was homework due in the morning. And so I had a discussion with them about this. And they said, you have to understand the context. So there's a group of people who can only do it on Saturday, the week before because they're working. And there's a group of people who have so many classes that the only time they can do it is the night of.
Right.
And so they were saying that even though the time looked very skewed, it was fine, it made sense for the dynamics of this particular class. So that was interesting. And we had a good discussion about that in the total of the class. But then I also just did grading the midterms for the class, and there's definitely a correlation between the people who never opened the review file and how they did on the midterm.
Right.
So that's sort of the next discussion. Like if you decided not to even open the review file, it was a huge impact on their grade.
Oh, yeah.
So there might be if you put this in a very micro format, right? If you haven't opened the review file 24 hours before the exam, that's an early alert.
Yeah.
And automating that so I don't have to go through and search.
Very good idea, yeah.
Nice, easy built-in thing.
Yeah.
And the same thing goes for so those are fourth-year students. And I have first-year students that keep forgetting to take the exam, even though the post-lab exam. So having an automated reminder just to the people, so you don't remind the people who finished it, but the people who haven't finished it, set up an auto reminder. Just on that completion aspect, I think could be a nice addition.
Yeah.
That's good. I don't know how to do it. Maybe doable, but I don't know how to do it. By recognizing that there's value, so I'm doing the human interaction on this one, and you can see that the students respond extremely positively to getting the reminder. Oh, yep, I'll do that.
So, I just wanted to mention something, so that there's an internal team right now within our group that I'm part of, our technology team, is looking at Insights, this learning analytics package that's part of LMS. So it's, kind of good timing in that we're going to start talking about, we're just starting to get familiar with it, trying to get input from faculty on the types of information and reports that would be useful in that case. That's a really interesting point in terms of what kind of input you can get from the system versus can it now trigger some automated types of communications. There is a tool within my courses called Intelligent Agents, which does some of that based on the student's behavior. I'm thinking that might be something you could do possibly now, but I can follow up with you on that. But I would love to, in light of our meeting internally next week, I'd love to reach out to you that have shown interest in this and just get some input as to what kinds of learning analytics you might be trying to get or would be interested in getting. Those are the types of questions that we're going to start to be kind of looking at. I know from meeting various faculty, the stuff is in part what faculty have already inquired about, but it would be, I'd be eager to pick your brains as well. So.
I think one of the interesting thoughts you did was the students are doing, you know, if they're a good student, then these things don't matter. But if they're struggling, or if they're struggling in some other way, then it matters a lot. And this, you know, even the simple things of the reminders, and so it might be, learning analytics might be very simple in this first cut, but very powerful
Yeah.
for helping students.
So I did something, I think last year, where we're using Mastering Engineering for homework. So it's outside of my courses, but it's tied. I don't know if you can track when they're making clinks over to the Mastering out of my courses. But the students who are starting the homework over the weekend, it's due Tuesday. The ones who started it before class on Monday had 10-point higher average on the exam than the ones who waited until the day before. But the only way for me to get that information is for me to go in on Monday, write down who started it, even though it's stored in there, like when they start, like they can't get that information to me. Like I have to go in Monday and take a snapshot and write down all these names and then compare it. So that was kind of a really thing. But I do use it on the other side when I'm writing early alerts. It takes me forever to write my early alerts, but I will go into Mastering and I will look at when they start each of their homework and how likely, and it's got all that information through Mastering because it's an online homework submission. But same kind of thing, I'll go in and I'll look at and see, like, of all of the content I post online, you've accessed 3% of it. I mean, so some of that stuff I'll manually put into alerts. I also started playing around with awards. I'm probably like the one person on campus, but my courses has awards now that you can give to well-performing students. So I have a homework habit award that I give to the people who start their homework early. So the other side of the early alert, I don't even know if the ones who aren't getting it know they're not getting it.
I know some people have to be graded for, so I want to take a moment just to thank our presenter, Rachel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I also want to plug the Flint Faculty Showcase coming up on November 3rd. You'll be there, right?
Yes.
It'll be in the University Gallery from 3 to 5, and it will be a showcase of everybody who has completed a project like this under the Provost and Innovation Grants. I'll send a link to all of you to register for that if you'd like. Is it November 3rd? Hopefully we'll have time to participate in democracy and celebrate.
Well, it's a Thursday, first Tuesday, so election day is actually the 8th.
Ah, good.
Thank you.
It's like a 3 week more.
Yes.
Because we want to wait longer. Last possible moment.
I'll also send you a recent D2L webinar. I have a recording on intelligent agents, which is of particular interest to Clark, but you'll still get it in the email. And Mary Beth, if you'd like, I can send information on the meeting that you're arranging if there's anybody here who's interested.
Well, I think it's a kickoff meeting for the internal group, but I think just going in with some ideas of the types of potential data that would be needed or useful.
Then I guess I'll say I'll take expressions of interest for future participation.
So.
I guess that one area of interest of mine too is in some of the learning management systems I've been looking at. Are there any adaptive learning algorithms that are built into the new version, or
From what I understand, there is some there might be that within the desire to learn, but I think it's separate from the actual learning analytics or / insights tool that we're looking at. I think, but the adaptive learning, I think there is that, but it's separate. But I'll, certainly find out.
I didn't know about awards. That is interesting.
You can create little badges, and I guess it pops up. I haven't even seen what it looks like, but students said it just like pops up on their screen.
So that's a parallel
that's
to
cool.
Kudos that's inside Starfish.
That's what I thought you were talking about.
Yeah, it's a new My Courses.
Yeah, because I've done the kudos thing. Yeah.
And as I try to sort out in my own mind what's the benefit of my courses versus Starfish, I guess the advising community can see Starfish, so there's
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
But this has these little, you get to design your own badges.
Oh, that's cool.
Like little stars.
Can you trigger them automatically based on?
Not that I know of, but I could be, right. So right now I'm doing it for a second year course, and I'm like, what am I doing? This has to be a freshman course. Like I gotta be getting them excited about doing good stuff on the freshman level. So now I'm looking at my freshman course trying to figure out what I could give awards for.
Nice.
I've had students like email me, thank you for this award you gave me. Like, I didn't even know this was a thing. I've never seen one before.
Yeah.